yeah, let's just say they put themselves into neutral. So Brent, when you talk and when Eugene talks and everybody else talks, you must know at least you get 45 minutes to 60 minutes because these people actually listen. Okay. I've really realized that they listen. So I sit and listen as well because just now Sandy decides to give us a test or something. And we all got to answer questions, so you have to listen here.
I was asked
But yeah.
Hey, hey,
do.
Eugene, you must be special.
Why?
I don't know where they got it because the birds cannot hear my computer. But yesterday the mockingbirds was hollering, Eugene, Eugene, Eugene. So where they got it, I don't know. But
Incredible.
I was going to say, Heinz, I was asked one time to give a sermon every Friday at an old age home, but it was just before lunch. There was one guy there at the front row, and man, was I on the clock. It was supposed to be a 20-minute sermon, and at 19 minutes, he was going, bring it to an end.
But Brent, we had people like that in church. I'm not lying to you. In the church,
I know.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
no, it's like do the benediction so we can get off to the haystack.
Exactly.
It's like and God forbid the food is not set out when they arrive. Okay, it was. To me, that was very weird. When I initially became a Seventh-day Adventist, I need to tell you this story, okay? So when I became, let me rephrase. When I was in the throes of becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, we get invited this first Sabbath, or the second Sabbath, the first one we went to, second Sabbath, they were having a communal lunch in the hall, and it was, and I said to my new friend, I said, so what can we bring? We'll go to our local deli and we'll go buy some roast chicken and some beef and stuff like that. And the guy said, oh, don't bring anything, just come. I'm not going. Nobody told me that they were vegetarian or mock vegetarian like some of them. Okay, well, I'm also a mock vegetarian. But anyway, so I didn't know what they were talking about. In fact, I wanted to rock up with a bottle of wine. Okay, because nobody told me that Adventists don't drink alcohol either. In fact, I still drank for 3 months after that. I drank wine until one evening at a Bible study. My friend's mother, after I made a comment that I had such a nice glass of wine, said to me, "But you're not supposed to drink wine." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Well, we are Adventists. We don't drink alcohol. And you cannot be baptized if you drink alcohol." I'm going, who said that? Nobody had told me. Okay. So to get back to this fellowship lunch, I wanted to bring chicken. Okay. Roast chicken, because that's what you have on a Sunday is roast chicken, isn't it? So it's the same on a Sabbath. But nobody bothered to tell me that this whatever. Okay. But there were two elders, okay, who grinned and said, well, why not bring chicken? Okay. To the horror of the pastor and the head elder, and they were duly spoken to a year afterwards. So yeah, I became known as the chicken man. So
well, Hein, if Christ went to that, he may have brought some fish.
Yeah.
Brent, that guy was letting you know he wasn't going to miss lunch for you.
Oh no, he was going to miss lunch for nobody.
But here's the worst, okay? So please, I don't know if you folks are the same there in the United States where most of you are, okay? Here's the thing. So at this thing, we come and there's all of these very weird food because I'd never eaten vegetarian food before, okay? And so I looked at this stuff and I sort of thought, you know what? There's a lot of beans here and my tummy and beans have never been friends. And I'm 45 years old at that stage. I ain't going to be eating beans, okay? Because I know what beans does to me, okay? I even look at beans, okay? And in mixed company, I'm not going to be eating beans today. But
why
anyway,
not, man? It's just musical fruit. That's all. It just makes you do musical fruit,
But you know what was the worst, Eugene? Was the stacks of pudding, cream puddings, and all type of puddings and cakes and whatever. Now I'm looking at this and I'm going, these people live off pudding. Okay, what type of religion is this? Okay, and you know, if I think back of it, do you know what sort of impression you give to people the first time they come to a Seventh-day Adventist church? You've all been in churches, some of you still are. Okay, have you ever thought of the impression people get that are new? Because most of us probably hasn't been new for a while. But when they walk in, now the reason for my story, you must ask Sandy about the green stuff. And so we rock up at Tarabella. Okay. Now I know I'm now supposed to be a vegetarian. So my first excuse to Elder John is, sir, I'm not a vegetarian. And he just laughed. Okay. He said, do you eat ice cream as well? I said, yes. so I think it was the first or second morning or whatever. We were standing there in queue at the RVs and whatever where the ladies were making, and they were making this greenish stuff. Okay. And I was looking at this. And then Sandy said to me, you must have some of the green stuff. And I'm going, does the Hulk drink that? Because it sure is going to make me green when I drink that. Okay. So they fed me the green stuff. Okay. Which, by the way, is an aphrodisiac as well, ladies, if you haven't noticed. Sandy makes some mean green stuff. But anyway, so I came back to South Africa and I patented the green stuff. And do you know, till today at work, I'm known as the green man who made the green stuff. So when people used to ask me, you know, how? Oh, yes, have they had your green stuff this morning? I said, yes, I have my green stuff. So there's a secret recipe and you need to ask Sandy what the green stuff is.
Yeah, but Hein, you can degas the beans. All you have to do is, like, if you're going to have beans tomorrow, tonight, put them in the pot and cover them with water and let them soak overnight in the water. Tomorrow, when you go to cook them, pour that water off and put new water on and cook them as usual, and you won't have any gas in your beans.
My wife does it twice. She'll cook them halfway, pour that water off, and then put fresh water in there, cook them the rest of the way, season them up, and I don't get gas.
Yeah, like I said, my dad always soaked them overnight and then cooked them, and there was never any gas in his beans.
He does that too.
Okay.
Ellen White said she could.
We're ready. It's time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me mute myself.
No more bean stories?
Well, Ellen White said she couldn't eat beans either.
Yeah, well, exactly. So that's why we eat chicken. But I thought, Marty, when you started, I thought we had to take the bean and a pin and then just prick each pin so it deflates. But anyways, you gave me a new way of degassing beans.
Welcome, everybody. It is Saturday, April 27th. It's 10 a.m. Pacific time. And I want to say hello to everybody at the camp, everyone from Bible Exploration TV that's attending the Passover camp this week. See all the pictures. Looks like everyone's having a great time, relaxing, beautiful lake there. I want to say hi to everybody in Africa and around the world that's had an opportunity to tune in and see the different speakers every day this past week. And I guess today is day 4 of day 7. And so today I'll be doing chapter 4 of a 7-chapter overview of the covenant code. And basically in the first chapter, we looked at the fact that there is a covenant. It's not a contract, it's a covenant, and how it was formed and when it was formed and what it is, and how basically it was God's pledge, God's solemn pledge in creating mankind, that he would create them in God's image and God's likeness, and in that image and likeness that they would inherit all of his creation, and they would walk together in harmony with each other and with God in the image and likeness of God. And on the sixth day, man was created in the image of uh, uh, God and being male and female and of one kind. But on the seventh day was their first day where they got to walk together, man, woman, walking with the Lord. And so that day was the day that God declared the Sabbath, where he has finished his work, he completed his work. And in that day, the, the covenant was fulfilled. Man walked together with God without sin and in harmony and peace. We then looked at what happened when that covenant was attacked and what the response was of the Lord, and how he didn't terminate the contract and he didn't terminate the lives of Adam and Eve. He stepped in the gap and he condemned sin in the flesh of Satan at that time. And he told the truth in love to Adam and Eve, and what with this new condition, they'd gone into captivity, they'd forsaken their birthright, and that it would be more difficult, obviously, from that point in the separation of sin, and it had become part of their nature, part of when you take in something from somebody else, it becomes part of who you are. And so basically, but in Genesis 3:15, there was the first kind of biblical prophecy. The Lord spoke about how he would be the enmity between the serpent and the woman, between her seed and his seed, and between the seed, the single seed that would come from the woman, that would be born from above, that would crush the head of the serpent, and in so doing would be bruised. And we looked at from that point on, the prophecy that was given, and knowing that all prophecy, when the fulfillment of prophecy is the fulfillment of the covenant. And we then looked at some of that prophecy, and we looked at how it all pointed to Jesus and how Jesus came in the flesh, the Word became flesh, and how he gave his testimony, the risen Christ gave his testimony in the book of Revelation. And in that book of Revelation, he showed us everything that would happen from that time, which was the beginning of the end times, to the fulfillment of his return. And we looked in that and we observed that there was instructions given to the seventh generation of the book of Revelation. The instructions were very specific and they were very timely. There's a little gap of time for the last call to evangelize the world, and that this generation was to do one specific thing to prepare themselves for their calling, and that was to turn and look at the original pattern. The pattern of worship had been so corrupted through, first of all, the 2,000 years from Abraham to Jesus, and then the time from Jesus till our time. All these corruptions that were foretold in the Bible, foretold through Daniel, that our generation would look specifically at this original pattern. So I said we're going to start to observe that, but you have to. I always like to understand why you're doing something. So we're to look at this pattern, but why would God point us to this pattern? Why, yes, we can go observe the pattern, but why? And the truth is because that is the explanation. That's the uncorrupted explanation. That pattern is the pattern of the covenant. And it's the same pattern that was used by the apostles, the same ones they were directed to. So, for example, Paul wrote two epistles, one to the Romans and one to the Hebrews. And of course, the Romans were living in pagan Rome, and they had one they had one set of circumstances. The Hebrews were the converts from Jerusalem, and They, of course, had much higher awareness of the pattern and things like that. And so Paul, guided by the Holy Spirit, used this pattern to talk to them about what had been fulfilled and what had not been fulfilled. So they would see in their lifetime, they would be able to observe exactly what had been done through this pattern. And I just want to go through this with you first, and then we'll take it from there. So beginning in chapter 4, Paul, and we're going to go through this slowly because it's very important. So Paul talks about, and he had talked in chapter 3 about God and his wrath, saying that they would not enter his rest. Remember, the Sabbath is the rest. The Sabbath is the memorial to the whole covenant. And he talks about in the wilderness how they had unbelief and how that whole generation did not enter into the promised land. It was their children that entered in, but because of their unbelief. So here he's starting off talking about saying, therefore, since the promise to enter his rest remains. Now, why he's saying that is because they had already started to make claims, as these Hebrew converts had already started to make claims that the Messiah had come, or the Messiah was coming, Messiah's here, Messiah's there. And Paul's saying no, because when he returns, that's the fulfillment of everything. So there's still a promise to enter his rest because he has not returned. So he's saying the promise to enter his rest remains. Let us beware that none of you be found to have fallen short. For we have also received the good news, which is the gospel, just as they did. Well, how did the people in the wilderness receive the gospel? The way that Paul's saying that they received. Well, they received the gospel through the tabernacle pattern. And so they had a dimmer view of it, but that's how they said, for we also have received the good news, just as they did. But the message they heard did not benefit them, since they were not united with those who heard it in faith. So it was a mixed, it wasn't mixed with faith. For we who have believed, he's talking about Paul, enter the rest. In other words, what's the promise of the rest? It's communion with God, it's peace with God, it's harmony with God. Paul has discovered that rest in his belief in the fulfillment. It says, for we who have believed enter the rest, in keeping with what he said. So what he said is true. Once we enter that rest, once we believe, we are in communion with God. We're entered that rest. So he said, I swore in my anger, they will not enter my rest. This was the first generation. Even though and this is important, even though his works have been finished since the foundation of the world. A finished means completed. Remember, the Sabbath was, my works have been completed. Enter my rest. From the foundation of the world. And he says here, for somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in this way. And on the seventh day, God rested from all his works. That was the very beginning. So from that time, God's works were complete. His Sabbath rest was available, and they walked together in the first one. It says again in that passage, he said, they will never enter my rest. Therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, all those who formerly, and also you got to think of this, that Sabbath rest was offered to Adam and Eve. And for a time, they walked in that rest. They walked in fulfillment of that covenant. But at some point, because of their unbelief, that they lost that rest. And the same thing with the people in the wilderness. Their unbelief had caused them, it wasn't because the promise wasn't there or that God hadn't completed the work. It was because of their unbelief. So someone, he says, on the seventh day, God rested from all his work. Again, in that passage, that they will never enter my rest. Therefore, since it remains for some to enter in, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter because of disobedience, he again specifies a certain day. Today specifies, and speaking to David, after such a long time. Today, if you hear this voice, do not harden your heart. So what Paul is saying here is, look at after the wilderness, after they entered into the promised land, he's even saying to David, which is a long time after the wilderness, he's saying today that rest is available. He specified that speaking through David after such a long time. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. For if Joshua had given them rest, because remember, it was Joshua that led them into the promised land. If Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. Therefore, a Sabbath rest remains for God's people. So what he's saying here is the one generation didn't enter the promised land because of unbelief. Joshua led the next generation into the promised land, but there was still rest for the people because the covenant that wasn't the fulfillment of the covenant. That was progress in the covenant. That was giving them the promised land. That was the land that they would become a nation, and et cetera, et cetera. But the promise still was still open. And God would have called it another day. It was always the Sabbath. It still remains a Sabbath. It says, therefore, a Sabbath rest remains for God's people. Paul's talking about his time. The Sabbath rest remains because, as we said at the beginning, Christ had not come, it had not returned. All these rumors that people were saying, or he's over here, or he's over there. No, he has not returned yet. When he returns, that is the final fulfillment of the covenant. Therefore, the Sabbath remains. The Sabbath remains open. Sabbath rest remains. So people talking about, well, the Sabbath was abolished. No, until his return, the Sabbath remains. That is our sanctuary. That is the seal of the covenant. That's the sign of the covenant. For the person who has entered his rest has rested from his own works, just as God did from his. Let us then make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will fall into the same pattern of disobedience. For the word of God is living and effective and sharper than any double-edged sword, penetrating as far as the separation of soul and spirit, joint and marrow. It is able to judge the thoughts and intention of the heart. God knows when you're resting in him and when you're not. Remember, Adam said that he felt naked and ashamed, and I said that's because he was in his rebellion and he got caught. For no creature is hidden from him. All things are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So this has been fulfilled. But the covenant, the final fulfillment is to come at his return. But he has fulfilled that sacrifice. He has become the high priest. He has passed through there. And you see, that's important here in a second. Because then we go to Hebrews 9, the light of the tabernacle. So he's talking about the first part of Hebrews 9 talks about the tabernacle itself. And then you get to, it says, but in the second went the high priest alone once a year, not without blood. So to talk about the high priest, remember, he said Jesus is the high priest now. Not without blood, which he offered for himself, the high priest, and for the errors of the people. The Holy Ghost, this signified that the way unto the holiest of all was not yet made manifest or made apparent while the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered, and this is really important, both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to the conscience. I've never heard anybody explain it properly. They're always saying, well, the sacrifices couldn't make you perfect. The blood of the goats and the lamb, they couldn't make you perfect. That's not what it's saying here. And I'll show you why in a second. It's saying it could not make that high priest perfect. He was a sinner. he had to offer blood for himself and the people. So he could not in himself fulfill the covenant. He could just point to the covenant. He was a type. He was a teacher. He was God giving us a three-dimensional pattern of his pattern of grace, and he could not fulfill the covenant himself. He was a sinner. He was a man. He had to offer blood. So there's nothing wrong with the covenant or with the observations. It just could not make him that did the service perfect, as we did, which stood only in meats and drinks and diverse washings and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation. But Christ, being come a high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, so not the copy of it, but the actual from heaven, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his, because he didn't need the blood and goats and calves to atone for himself, but by his own blood he entered into once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. So the weakness of the pattern isn't the pattern. It's not the observations. It's the mediator of that pattern himself could never fulfill it. And I'll show you a little bit. So, because listen to this. For if the bloods of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkled and unclean, sanctified to the purifying of the flesh. So he's not saying it didn't say, if they had faith in those observations, if they observed those things in faith, if they went to God as a repentant sinner and they brought their lamb, it sanctified them. And Paul's saying here, even the blood of goats and lambs sanctified them because they're sanctified by their faith. They're not saying it didn't sanctify them. It didn't make, it wasn't the perfect offering, but it sanctified them. God sanctified them by their faith. How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament, because he is the only one that is sinless, that could fulfill it. That by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the First Testament. So for everybody that was under that, from Adam all the way till the person living just before Christ to the very last, all those that were under that redemption, that had faith in that redemption, if by his death their redemption came, they which are called might receive the promise of an eternal inheritance. So what was nailed to the cross? Jesus said unto him, because they asked him, what are the greatest commandments? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. This is Jesus speaking. And with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. And all the law and all the prophets, loving God with all his heart, loving his brethren, loving us with all his heart. He is the one that was nailed to the cross. The fulfillment of all the law and prophets, the fulfillment of all the prophecies, was nailed to the cross and said, this is Jesus, King of the Jews. So the weakness in the old pattern was, okay, first of all, the strength in the old pattern was it was a gospel. It was good news to repentant sinners. It was good news that they were forgiven. It was the part of that dimly showed the gospel. But when Christ himself came, it was not dim anymore. It was real. He didn't have to atone for himself. He atoned for everybody else. So the weakness of the old observations was that the one presenting them could not himself fulfill the covenant. The strength of the new covenant. See, we talked about different types of covenant law. There's property law, there's a covenant. There's marriage law, that's supposed to be a covenant. And there's will and testament. That's a covenant. And none of those need someone else's acceptance. If I have a will and I leave it to you, you don't need to agree to it. In fact, you can reject it if you want to. But it's my testament. And when I pass away, it becomes in effect. So it's still a covenant. But it's changed. Now he's done it, and then God raised him up. It's up to him who he wants to leave that to. And he's told us in advance. It's to us. That's part of the fulfillment of the covenant. God would walk with man in harmony and peace, and they would have dominion over it. He had to win back the inheritance before he could return it. So it's important because this tabernacle echoes, because we just talked about in Paul's explanation that it goes back to the original Sabbath. It goes back to the wilderness. It goes back to their time. So the tabernacle echoes creation, and the gathering on the Sabbath echoing the original Sabbath. It also speaks redemption and points forward to the fulfillment of the covenant in Jesus. This is the tabernacle pattern. Hebrews presents a once and for all act that ceases the necessity of a continual repeated entry once per year of the earthly high priest. Jesus in his once for all entry into the heavenly sanctuary completes the need for sacrifice both retroactively and proactively. But upon this entry once for all, he also provides the way for the Hebrew community to enter, those living back then, those living today. It's entering into that sacred time and that sacred space and having peace through that belief in his fulfillment. They're moving from this present age and all of its attributes, which are passing away, into the age to come, prepared beforehand and enduring in God. History has progressed and been fulfilled, and yet continues to be fulfilled, inaugurated, and yet unfinalized, because he had not returned. So the cycles of time, both weekly and festily, the observation are commemorated in the past, but experienced in the present. They don't go away. They all point to separate acts of Jesus. When someone says, "Oh well, the Sabbath day was changed because Jesus was resurrected," that fulfilled the Sabbath, and so no, there was a day for the resurrection. It's called first fruits, and Paul says he is the first fruits of the resurrection. So we don't need another day called this. And the first fruits was a Sabbath. They're all given as Sabbaths or special gathering. So we don't need it. And Paul says back here, otherwise he would have given it a different day. If the Sabbath had changed, if the rest had been fulfilled, he would give it a different day. But he didn't. It's always been a Sabbath rest. It always will be a Sabbath rest. That's the covenant. That's the memorial for the covenant. So to be clear, Paul is showing them that the tabernacle pattern is three-dimensional. It has a breadth, a length, and a height. It also has a specific time. A beginning, which is the first Sabbath, a middle, which is the restoration of the first Sabbath, and an end, the fulfillment of the first Sabbath. It's a three-dimensional blueprint of time and space of the fulfillment of the covenant of God with man through Jesus Christ. And it is all the work of the Lord, lest no man should boast in their own work, but all should rejoice and rest in the works of the Lord. The risk to those who stop watching before the Lord fulfills all things is that they will not enter his rest. For the Lord rested, and the same Lord was raised on the third day. And this we acknowledge in our baptism into his works. That's another ceremony. It's a acceptance, like in a covenant. I said earlier on when we first started speaking about it, There's usually a ceremony, some sort of an outward sign for your acceptance of the covenant. And so keeping the Sabbath is an outward sign of your belief and your accepting the offer of this rest. And the baptism is an outward sign of you entering into his death and resurrection, believing that that's been fulfilled. So Paul exhorts them in the fulfillment in tabernacle terms. The book is called The Covenant Code. It's about the return of Jesus, and it's about the turn of time. Because the emphasis that Paul was talking about was on what had been fulfilled, but also his emphasis was on what had not been fulfilled. There remains a Sabbath rest because the Lord had not returned. There remains an opportunity for man to enter his rest. In the same manner, the seventh generation of the book of Revelation is commanded to return to observe that pattern, the same pattern that Paul and all the rest of the apostles were able to explain what had happened through that pattern. Just as it provided a 3D blueprint of the atoning sacrificial fulfillment of Christ in Paul's generation, it most obviously will provide the same 3D blueprint for the fulfillment of the glorious return of his final generation, so that we, like Paul and the remaining apostles, would be able to observe this, and in this observation, make a final call to our brethren to enter the Lord's Sabbath covenant rest. In other words, why are we looking at this? Because we are the seventh generation. Why did the Lord tell us to look at this? It was a better thing. Because we are the seventh generation of the book of Revelation. And because something's about to be fulfilled in our generation before we pass. And so he points us here, like he pointed the apostles, to look and see for ourselves that that fulfillment is foretold in that pattern. And once we see this, like Paul, now we know, why, since Paul knew that the pattern had been fulfilled in his lifetime, why then did he spend the rest of his life, and the rest of the apostles, why did he spend the rest of his life, risk his life, to go tell everybody else? Because he already knew himself that it had been fulfilled. He was already at peace, because that's what God put in his heart. When he called him, he said, I have many things to do through this. This is the same guy that stoned Stephen and persecuted disciples. But his heart, God grabbed him by the heart, showed him the truth. And so he was compelled, like he said, I can't help it. I'm compelled to go tell my brethren about this fulfillment. Just as the last generation is compelled, once they see he really is coming in our generation, they're compelled to go tell the world. And here's why. Let me show you why I believe that he's coming in our generation. It's in this pattern. And that's the things we're going to be looking at in the next couple of days. But that's why we're looking at these things, is because of a fulfillment. We've been sent to look at this pattern because a fulfillment is coming, just like it came in Paul's lifetime and those that the other apostle that spoke also in tabernacle terms. So as we prepare to enter the observation of the sacred space, keep in mind always that we are also entering the sacred times from beginning to end through the Lord. Every detail was given with purpose, as well as the manner it was given. The first holy day given is a Sabbath. So when we read about this pattern, the first day it tells us what is a pattern, is the Sabbath. The first article of furnishing is the Ark of the Covenant and its mercy seat. So those are the things we look at first, the Sabbath and the covenant and the mercy seat, because that's what's given to us first. The Sabbath harkens back to the origin of the covenant and the first man and woman. The ark is three-dimensional, with a width, length, and height, and is most holy to represent the fulfillment of the covenant in the Lord. Every God-given day and way of observation is given for a great purpose, and all our observations of these given days and ways of observance offer us greater light into the observance of them. I'll give you an example here in a second, but when Adam and Eve received the promise, they knew that the seed would crush the head of the serpent, but they didn't have any idea how long that would be. That's why when they have their first child, which was through their own knowing, intimacy. They have Cain. She says, "The Lord has given me a man." So maybe this is the Messiah. Maybe Cain's the one, because she didn't have the time yet. It wasn't revealed yet. And as the covenant progressed, then more and more specifics were given, and and when that pattern was given, it showed. So that timeline from the promise in Genesis 3:15 to the fulfillment beginning in the New Testament with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John the Gospel, that there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's a space, a height, a depth, whatever. This tabernacle pattern gives us that, and it shows us the different, like in the 7 different observations, different fulfillments, etc. And it starts to teach us and give us a real understanding of things. So I'm just saying that days were given for specific reasons. So just want to look at one day that we just happened to observe this week. So when the ark came to rest, it says, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. And at the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down." I remember it started on the 46th day, so this is day 197. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to a rest in the mountain of Ararat. Well, when God gave the covenant pattern to Moses, he changed the 7th month to become the 1st month. The 197th day became the 17th day of the 1st month. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of the months. It shall be the 1st month of the year to you." So that same day, that's the 17th, was day 197 to Noah. Israel also passed through the Red Sea on the 17th of Nisan. Because remember, the Passover was the 14th. It was a 3-day journey. So that same day, they passed through from Egypt through the Red Sea. Death in their old life, the drowning of the Egyptians, and resurrection to a new life, a God on the 17th day. The manna, so that's on their way into Egypt before they even get to the promised land. The manna ceased on the 16th of Nisan, and from the 17th, Israel feasted on the new grain of the promised land. Joshua 5:10-12. So they ate the first fruits in a new life in the promised land. And what's interesting is that, let me just read one more. The death sentence given in a decree to destroy all Jews issued the 13th of Nisan. Esther proclaimed a 3-day fast, and for the 14th, 15th, and 16th. On the 16th, Esther approached the king. On the 17th, the tables were turned on their enemy with a new decree. All these different things happened on the same day. Given in covenant patterns, oh, sorry, a little typo there, but so when he gave Moses this pattern and he gave him first fruits, whatever, this appointed time, this holy day, it was historic, it was also prophetic. It was given to, so even when he gave that to Moses, they were still in the wilderness, and they weren't to observe it until the promise had been fulfilled that they go into the promised land. So for 40 years in their wilderness, they didn't observe that day. It was given to them, it was part of the sanctuary. But when they went into the promised land, that's when they ate the first fruits. Even the way into the most holy place, they built the whole tabernacle and given all the commands that we got. But remember, Aaron's sons tried to go into the most holy place themselves because the way hadn't been revealed to them yet. And Aaron lost his 2 sons. So things are given very specifically, and they're all given for our understanding. So when we look at this holy place, I'm trying to prepare you that because some people just, oh yeah, let's go look at the ark and let's look at. We are entering into a sacred time, a sacred place, and we're observing the pattern that God gave to us. And through that pattern, almost all of Christianity has been explained through the apostles. We understand from the New Testament what was revealed to us through the apostles and through Jesus, but most of those terms come from the same pattern. And so we're to go back and look at this uncorrupted pattern today. So finally, in our observations, we'll be comparing historic time. I've discussed this at length previously, and you can go back to the online videos for more detail. But in general, the historic time we are observing is the biblical time. And I'll include next the biblical timeline, so you may refer to it as necessary or desired through our observations. So we're looking at the tabernacle pattern, but we're also looking in fulfillment, we're looking at the time, the biblical timeline. So the first timeline is from Adam to the flood of Noah. So, and this is very straightforward and without controversy because it's identical in almost all Christian and Judaism sacred texts. So let's go through it kind of quickly. But so where do we get the text from? Genesis 5:3. Adam became the father of Seth at 130 years of age. So we don't know how, we just know that Adam was 130 at this point. So 0 plus 130 equals 130. Seth became the father of Enosh at 105, 5'6", 130 goes on 105 is 235. We go down to Enoch and Kenan. Canaan becoming the father of Eliab. All the way down to kind of an important one here is Jared becoming the father of Enoch. So Jared was born exactly 460 years from Adam. And we'll see this when we look at the tabernacle later on, why that's important. Because Jared's the 6th generation. Then we have Enoch being born, and he's the 7th generation. And he's the generation that God took without seeing death. Then we have his son Methuselah. And Methuselah means when he dies, it will come. So Methuselah is given as a sign of what would come, the flood. Then we have Lamech, and he's the father of Noah. Noah was born in 1056. And we see in Genesis 7:6, the flood started when Noah was 600. 1056 plus 600 is 1656. So this you'll find in all but one translation. And I'll share that translation with you right now. The only variance to this timeline is found in the Greek Septuagint versions of the Old Testament scripture. This is a translation from the original Hebrew scriptures to the Greek language that was completed by 70 Hebrew scribes at the height of the Greek Empire, a couple hundred years BC. There are obvious errors in this version with what appears to be an attempt by the Hebrew scribes to add greater length to their ancestry to parallel the Greek claims of more ancient ancestry more closely. So they wanted to look as old as the Greeks claimed to be. But there's errors that come out of that were never caught. Errors such as having Methuselah die 3 years after the flood of Noah. So if he's the one that's given as a sign of the flood, when he dies, it will come. But in this errant timeline, he dies 3 years after. And they don't, in the scripture, it still doesn't, it's just in the timeline where you catch that. Like I said the other day, Noah's his grandfather. What did he do for 3 years, especially the year of the flood? Tread water for a year. Hey, Noah, you forgot me. And then live 2 years somewhere else and then die. So you can see there's an error there. But in the same translation, same Septuagint, whatever, there's only 2 words added to a very key verse. Those 2 words are "and Canaan." to biblical texts that resulted in scholarly disagreement for 3,000 years as to the length of the sojourn of the children of Israel in Egypt. I'll show you that in a minute. But so because those two words are added in that one variation, septon, then there's, okay, was it a 215-year period in Egypt or 430-year period? And because if it's in Canaan, then it cuts into that 430 years. So it's 215, and then you get all these things that come out of it. The problem is the people that want to use that timeline say, oh, look, it says and Canaan, so it's 250 years. They don't want to use the timeline in that same translation with the added years, because then their 4,000 years could never add up, or their exact 40 whatever it is, because you can't add them up. You can't use that errant timeline and then this errant word and then come to some. That's what that is shooting a target and then painting or shooting an arrow on the barn door and painting a target around it, saying, see, it's exactly 4,000 years or whatever. And I'm not arguing with that or anything. I'm going to show you something here in a second. I'm just saying that that's the only place that occurs. And so you've had this scholarly argument for thousands of years over how long do they actually spend in Egypt. Notwithstanding these types of controversies, great progress has been made, especially the last century, due to numerous historic and astronomical records to complete a biblical timeline from Adam to creation at the start of the ministry of Jesus in Jerusalem, AD 27. Today, most scholars and church theologians, even those who disagreed only 50 years ago, have come to a near universal agreement of this biblical timeline from Adam to the ministry of Jesus. So, for example, the Adventists, there's always 50-50, well, actually, probably more 70-30 in favor of a 215-year sojourn, with 70% and maybe 30% saying, oh, no, it was 430 years. Well, now modern scholarship, and you can look it up at Andrews University, et cetera, have seen the new evidence and new records, and they're almost universally say, no, it was really 430 years. And even in the Adventist commentary, excuse me, from the 50s, it says this is our what we think, but there could be a new light on the subject. So it's not a make or break thing. But what I want to tell you is I'd like to caution those that prefer alternative timelines not to be discouraged or to turn out the message from the tabernacle that I want to share with you, because I'll demonstrate to you at the end that any range of total timeline that ranges from 4,000 to 4,200 years, which is the typical variance there, will lead to the same conclusion. In other words, 99% of what I'm going to show you will be exactly the same. For example, even people that had to, well, it really doesn't matter. You're going to end up that in that range of 200 years, it's not going to matter. It's the only thing that's going to matter is a slight, you're going to just be slightly more accurate in a few things, but it's not going to make it, it's not a make or break thing. Don't let it be a make or break thing, because it won't change 95% of what or 99% of what I want to share with you. And at the end, I promise you that we'll look at the difference between 4,000 and 4,200 years. So, but for your reference, it's said here, there's only a slightly greater precision when all factors have been considered, like jubilees, etc. When you compare all those things to the different timelines between 4,000 and 4,200 years, the one I'm presenting here, I think will have more support. So what I do then is I accidentally skipped a page here, but so this is the timeline where, and I put this together myself a few years ago, but so you start off on one side is the year from creation, because the Bible counts upward. So we don't know when Adam So Adam, creation by God. Genesis 1. This is when we go backwards from BC, from 27 or from 0 backwards. And you get this number only from this number. But then that timeline I was just showing you about the birth of Seth, Enoch, Genesis 5, 3, 5, 6. So you start to we'll get to the flood of Noah, birth of Noah, 500 years old, birth of Shem, Methuselah died, year of the flood of Noah. So you see, 1656. Also, the year Methuselah died, 1656. It's Genesis 5:27, Genesis 1. So then that's called the antediluvian period. So that ends 1656 from creation, which is that starts 4114 BC according to this timeline. Then the next ones are pretty straightforward too, because they're all in the Bible. Genesis 11, which is the sons of Noah and their descendants: Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru. It goes through, and here's where you get to the controversial part. So after Terah, then you have Abraham born, and here's the scriptures on it, which would be 2166 BC by this timeline. And then you have death of Noah, birth of Isaac and Rebecca married, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where you get into the controversy, because where Joseph is born, Isaac dies, go all the way through this. Joseph dies 2309, if you add up all these numbers. But there's a gap then that goes to Aaron and Moses being born, where at the time it was hard to fill in. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the stuff here, but so then it picks up again. Moses being born, Exodus from Egypt. Now, what's interesting is that even when you have the difference between the 215 or 430, for example, the Adventist commentary that had originally 215 years, and this timeline both had the same 1446, 1445 timeline for that. So even though some of the numbers up here might have been in controversy, they end up with the same number down here. Anyway, so then you proceed through time, and you go through, and all these are very well documented. So we only have that one little gap that there was ever any controversy over. King David, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is the timeline. And there's different things too, like this known solar eclipses, Lincoln serial list. So you have some secular records that set this timeline, and because of that timeline being set, it helps set a whole bunch of other ones over here. Alexander the Great, when he conquered Egypt, there's different secular records. But so Jesus born 4 to 6 BC. We don't know specifically that timeline. So then we go to 1 AD, and the transition to AD, there's no 0. So history moves from 1 BC to 1 AD. So you have to subtract 1 from the total. And at the end, for 27 AD, you get 4,140 years to this 27 AD period. And remember I said to you, so don't get all up in a knot, anywhere from 4,000 to 4,200 for this number is going to have very minimal effect on the overall picture over thousands of years. So rather than dispute and argue about things, hang on to the end and look at, I mean, you're already in a minority. We're already in a minority to even talk about that the world's only 6,000 or just over 6,000 years old. So if we want to argue about whether it's 50 years one way or the other, it's not worth the argument at this stage. I'm just going to show you that this is the timeline that I used, that I put together based on all the biblical scripture and based on all the research I did, which was very extensive. And it's the one that most scholars agree with. In the end, if I was wrong on it, I wouldn't even bat an eye, because where I've come to the conclusion through the tabernacle pattern, which has they match these numbers, that the tabernacle pattern is the most accurate. These are just us, man, trying to plot in when it was. And so my confidence actually comes from the tabernacle more than from this list. But to show the list that we didn't just make up a number, this is that list. And then the Jerusalem temple being destroyed, book of Revelation being written by John when Christ visited him at 96 AD. So in preparation for all that, now we're ready to observe the actual tabernacle. And I hope that we've seen, like, this is a very special place we're going to enter. And it doesn't just cover the time from Moses, even though that's when he was given the pattern. It harkens back all the way to Sabbath. It harkens back to the flood. I mean, I showed you that day 197, well, that's when the ark rested on the mountain. You know, that's when the waters had receded. That's when the decree against the Jews ended. That's when they crossed into the promised land. That's when, you know, all these things happened. God caused them to happen on that same day. And so they're memorialized in this Passover, this incredible, you know, picture of the resurrection. So, excuse me. And so these things are I've put together 7 chapters, and I just people have asked me a couple of times by email this week about getting a copy of these, and we've said that basically that when this presentation is finished, these 7 presentations, that Bible Explorations TV is the one that is sponsoring all this stuff, bringing it to you for free, putting it online, putting it on these, like on the website, YouTube, Zoom, Roku, satellite, and you can go and you can watch live for free. You can go back to YouTube for free, and you can replay these things without any cost or any time. But if you want a copy of the 7 chapters that I'm showing you and all the reference, whatever, then after the series is finished, then with like a $20 donation or something we'll talk about the next day or two, then you'll receive a copy. And that's just to help the ministry, just to help. I mean, along with your donation, you just get a copy, because we're doing, you know, this is done with just our own, just very little resources, and it's done to be shared for free. But sometimes, you know, as a, if you want extra, if you want the books and whatever, then that's, you know, that's why there'd be you'd get it with a donation. So I hope that makes sense. But I'm just trying to answer the emails I'm getting every day about getting a copy of it and when will it be available and what the cost is and all this sort of stuff. It's just, it'll be based on just, if you donate, you get it as a gift for the donation. The goal is that from here, that it'll actually build into something where there's videos and there's books and things available. That'll be much easier for you to get access to, just go into Amazon and spend $3 or whatever and get an ebook or whatever. But right now we're just trying to, you know, get the message out, and the goal this week is just to do the 7-part foundation of what the covenant code is, in a way that we can understand it, in a way we can share it. And I hope it's a blessing to you. And I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention. And like I said, you can go watch any of this on YouTube later on. But tomorrow we'll start to dive into actual observations and everything we've been talking about is to get to that point. So with that, I will stop my screen sharing and I will return over here. I think I got a couple of minutes if there's any questions or comments. Probably got about 3 or 4 minutes here.
I have one.
Okay.
You mentioned, and you may have explained it, but how are we coming up with the 7th generation from Revelation?
Yeah, I explained it the other day where in chapter 10, you hear about the 7 thunders and etc. And it's just before that sound. And all through Revelation, you hear 6 of this and then the 7th, 6 of this and then the 7th. So there's a pause between the 6th and the 7th where John is visited by an angel with the open book and says, "Eat this book, digest this book, and you must prophesy. You must put nations, kings." So there's a little time frame to digest this book and to make God's last calling. And then it says the very first sentence of chapter 11 is observe the tabernacle, measure the tabernacle. So the only instructions that generations is given is to measure the tabernacle. Then, like I was saying, I started off today. Well, why would those instructions be important? Well, because that in that tabernacle is an observation of the fulfillment of, and you'll see as we go through it, of his return. Something that other generations haven't been able to see before. Not that it wasn't there, but there's a different perspective of time, and it's kind of hidden in the open. But it's easier to demonstrate than to try and explain. But the short answer is because the book tells us which the blessings come from he that reads the book, hears the book, and obeys or keeps it. And so when you're given an instruction to go back and measure the tabernacle, if you don't do it, then you're not going to get any blessing. And so the point of it is we're instructed to do it. And people want to keep us from observing prophecy or observing, timelines, or even if someone said to you, well, why are you observing Passover? Well, it says in Revelation 11:1, go back and observe it. It says there, go observe the people, the altar, the ways, the days. So why are you observing? Well, because the Bible, because Jesus says before he returns to go back and observe it. That's exactly what it says. The people, the altar, the ways, the days, you go back and observe that before Christ comes, because that is going to, that along with the Holy Spirit, is going to empower the, like Paul was able to explain the fulfillment to the Hebrews using the tabernacle, showing them, look, this has been fulfilled in your lifetime, and this has not been fulfilled yet. Christ has not returned. Get rid of these rumors. There's still a rest open. And so in our generation, this is about to be fulfilled. And here's the evidence of it. So all I can do is, without controversy or whatever, there's no date, there's no time. But to see that it's in our generation, I think it's clear when we observe the tabernacle pattern. You'll see it's very clear that tabernacle is completed in our generation. It didn't end at the crucifixion and resurrection. If you add up the dimensions, whatever, it continued. It continued on, and things were fulfilled. For example, the Roman end of the Roman Empire, Pope going into captivity, all in exact accordance to that same pattern, right up until our day. And then all of a sudden it ends. There's no that you've built the tabernacle, the capstone's on there. There's no other thing you can add to it. So to me, that would be very obvious that would be the return, especially when around the top of the ark there's a crown, and and that's the height. The mercy seat, which is the same length and the same width as the ark, but it sits on top of the ark. It's the mercy seat, and that's where the atoning blood is. But the height of the ark is another dimension, another 1.5. So if you have 4,000 years till that event happens, what's 1.5 times 4,000? 6,000 years for the crown event. If you have 40, a little over 4,000, a little over 6,000 years. So it's in the pattern. It shows in the pattern the atoning event and the crown event. And those are some of the things we're going to look at.
And he says those days will be shortened, so it could be
Absolutely.
sooner.
And I believe they will.
Yeah.
I believe that we're very close to a very momentous time, which could be a set of time after that, a very limited set of time, but I believe it will be cut short. I see
Well, I
there's
appreciate what you've done, and I've gained a lot of knowledge here. So keep
if
it
you
up.
look at two major events, the birth of Jesus and the death and resurrection of Jesus. So which are you going to call the Jubilee? Which, like, when he comes into the world, or whatever? But if he cut the time short, it would be in memorial to the birth of Jesus. It would be very, very soon from now. But remember, the ministry was 33 years. So if it's more to do with the end of time of that, it could be a little while after that. But there's a very narrow window of which we are literally in 2027 entering if each brick is a brick in there, the last brick is laid in 2027. Now that brick has a little bit of time in it. But it can't be that there won't be another brick on top of it, because that's the capstone. So as we look at the tabernacle, we'll see that the foundation's been laid, everything's been done. There's a beginning, there's a middle, everything that's been foretold in there, except for what Paul is talking about. There is still a rest. There's still a rest for God's people. There's still a chance to enter that covenant, and there will be till he returns it. And that, the fact that when you go back to what I said earlier in the presentation, I've heard so often that the ordinances couldn't make people perfect, and the blood of goats and lamb, and they've never looked at what it actually says, that it couldn't make them performing the service perfect. So it cannot fulfill the covenant. We cannot rest in a high priest that has sin to say that it's been fulfilled, because it hasn't. Only the seed of the woman, the sinless seed that would walk in the image and likeness of God and love his father and love his brethren enough to not cling to his own flesh, only he could take back the inheritance. And it's because he is perfect that when he does it, it only needs to be done once for everybody before and everybody to come. And when he returns, it's simply because his plan, which God only knew the day, was for his family to grow, to be fulfilled, to fill the earth, to multiply it. And if it would have ended in 27 AD, you and I weren't part of the plan. But the blessing is, if we're the last generation, what a blessing to be part of the plan, to be the last, and to be able to see genetically, we're a copy of a copy of a copy, and spiritually, we're at the toes of that big statue with the gold, and we're mixed with the clay and the iron. Our faith is so poor compared to our forefathers, like compared to the Abrahams and John and Paul, and I mean, our faith is way down here. But the blessing of God is that that's when the rock comes, and destroys everything that's outside of that. And in our in God, it says, in the end, they'll all be taught by God. As we observe because this isn't a one-off study. We could do this study every single week, and we could look at a little period of time. Let's look at the 361 years between Abraham and the death of Joseph, that 360-year period. And we could see, okay, Abraham, this happened when he was 75. This happened when he was 100. This happened when he was 175. This happened when and you'll see the same pattern, the exact same pattern that you'll see in the feast, you'll see it's all the same pattern. And it's all fulfilled. It's all based on the Sabbath. When we say that a day for 1,000 years, 1,000 years per day, it really is a 7-day fulfillment. And why wouldn't it be? God said, on the seventh day, I'll rest in my works, and so when did Jesus come? Well, it's the fourth day. Well, why would the fourth day? Well, isn't that when the light was divided from the darkness, and the sun and the moon and all the observance began? But it was the truth of it is that he had to deliver us. It's all about him. And
Amen.
when we then, like I said, it's just we're observing this to see what we find. And in the next couple of days, we're going to find this much. But that much is more than we would have found without looking. And that much is more than anybody's willing to talk about or that has been talked about. And it's all new, and it's refreshing, and it's encouraging, and it's strengthening, because Paul had rest, and Peter had rest, and John had rest, because they knew it was fulfilled. They knew the Holy Spirit fell upon them. And why would they go out there and risk their lives and talking if they already knew it was fulfilled? Because they knew that he was going to return, and they did not want to be found sleeping. They loved him. They wanted to tell people about him. And it was out of that covenant love that they had for him, and that Holy Spirit, and that they were changed men, but they were at rest, and they were in communion with God. They were walking with God. They were doing miracles. Paul's handkerchief could be sent, and it would heal somebody. The shadow of Peter walking by somebody would heal somebody. They raised people from the dead themselves. And Peter, Peter was crucified upside down. James, the brother of Jesus, was thrown off the wall of the temple. And when they saw him, his knees were like camels, so callous from being on his knees praying, because his brother was the Messiah. And he never recognized that until it was almost too late. And he just prayed. And James, he's the one that says, "Show me your works, and I'll show you your religion." It was all about the heart for him. And so when you find out the truth that this is the one that loved you so much, and he's the one he's the Lord that was in the garden, he's the Lord that was with Moses, he's the Lord that was with Paul, and then he's the one that's coming, and he can show you, yeah, this was me. This was me, and I did this, and let me show you in this pattern, like he showed his disciples. Moses wrote about me. Well, where did Moses write about you? And where do I see the word Jesus and everything that he wrote about was about me, And he showed them. When they walked on the road with Damascus with him, he opened up the scriptures, and their hearts burned. They couldn't. It was just like, wow, this is who we've walked with for 3.5 years, and he's risen. And so it's when we stop going for that light, it was, oh, we got the picture. Jesus. We know what the feasts are. We know this. Well, now we're just dimming the light. because he still wants to show us every day that light. Here, let me show you. And Hein and I were talking about this the other day. I could prepare that same thing today now for tomorrow. And I would tell you something additional that I didn't tell you today because God showed it to me tomorrow.
Yep.
Every time you go there, if you don't go with the arrogance that you know it all, just say, show me, then he shows you every time. Like, wow, wow. So it always does the person presenting more than it does the person receiving.
Exactly.
Because he's given it to you so you can give it to somebody else. And that's the beauty of it all. And that's why when you get these old church elders and this old tradition and this old whatever, they want to just silence people coming in or whatever. The church is dead. I mean, if you look at churches right now, any church, I don't care what, any Christian church, are they growing? No, they're all dying. And are they bringing in new members? No, they're not. And so how would this generation, who's the weakest generically and who's, I mean, the survey that just came out, the faith in the literal word of God in the U.S., which is the stronghold for Christianity, has just from the 70s has gone from over 50 something down to under 30 something. It's just dying, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why this Bible revival, this opportunity through, to turn back and look at, that's why I believe it'll catch fire, because people are lost. People are looking for the truth. And so when you can talk about the Sabbath, not in a way that, oh, you're wrong for not observing this, but here's the blessing of the Sabbath. It is the thing of the covenant. You'll see in the first thing tomorrow, I said the first day we're given is the Sabbath. The first thing we're given is the Ark of the Covenant. And we'll see some observations. And you'll see that if you weren't aware of the Sabbath, you wouldn't understand why it happened at that time. But only because you're aware of God's fulfillment is the seventh, then you go, oh, I understand why it happened at that time. So you can not only see it, but you can understand it. You can understand why it happened at that time. Why did the flood happen exactly in 1656? When you understand the Sabbath, you go, I know why it happened that time. God just showed me because that is the number of his fulfillment. Well, how do you get that? Well, we'll show you. You'll know why these, like Enoch, the seventh generation, and his father, the sixth generation, the difference between the sixth and the seventh. Well, his father was born 460 from Adam. If you look at the boards around the tabernacle, there's 46 boards. What's the height? 10 high, 460. That's the sixth. What about the seventh? We'll get into that. Because it represents all of time from the beginning to the end. They're all represented there. The sixth generation, they're all redeemed. He's redeeming every one of them in that tabernacle. It's you think about creation. Well, that tabernacle with those thick curtains, and that would be the darkest place you could ever walk into. 4-inch thick curtain between the holy place and the most holy place. So what happens in that dark place? Brings in the light. The light's from within. And it's like creation, let there be light. But then the person that has to keep that light and keep it going is the high priest, this redemption. And he can only light that from the oil, and he's got to keep the incense going from the altar, and it's all about creation and redemption. But it's yeah, I think I'm over my time now. I'm not sure. Is Dean, are you going next?
Yes, Dean's going next, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn the YouTube off and back on for everybody that's watching. So make sure you don't think we're gone. We have Dean come in with his third one or second one. So we'll be right back. You guys can go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that, Dean.
No problem, brother. I wish I could. I'm in a situation where I can't be where I want to be. I want to be listening to this. But you know, it really, what you're speaking about really brings it home, and see that you make it after the pattern shown thee in the mount. It has to
Yeah.
be exact, and or it throws everything